Amy, I'm not super big into New Year's resolutions because I feel like the things we always commit to for resolutions should just be things we commit to the whole year. So I've been trying to get back into weightlifting
Ooh.
recently. And I've started using protein shakes again, and shaker bottles simply blow. The protein is always so clumpy, and I feel like a
Uh-huh.
total idiot using the thing, like
Yep.
shaking it like a shake weight in the middle of the gym. So I decided to ditch my shaker bottle for good and get myself a BlendJet 2 portable blender because it makes perfectly blended protein shakes in 20 seconds.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, BlendJet 2, it's portable, like Olivia said. So, you can blend up a smoothie at work, a protein shake at the gym, or even a margarita on the beach, which is always
Ow.
good. um, BlendJet, it's small enough to fit in a cup holder, but powerful enough to get through tough ingredients like ice, frozen fruit with ease. BlendJet 2 is also whisper quiet, so you can make your morning smoothie without waking up your whole house. And it lasts for 15 plus blends and recharges quickly via USB C. And best of all, BlendJet 2 cleans itself. You just have to blend water with a drop of soap and you're good to go. And that actually is a big deal because washing blenders is so
Oh
annoying.
my God, a
So,
literal nightmare.
yeah. The easy clean is a great feature about BlendJet 2.
Hell yeah. I'm also super into like pop, like, because I'm someone who wears black, like all black,
Mhm.
almost all the time. I'm a very neutral gal, and I'm looking down at my outfit right now: black shirt, black pants, black shoes. But I'm
Same.
very much into like a really,
Uh-huh.
really bright pop of color. So I'm very into like hot pink and bright orange. And I'm
Yeah.
currently obsessed with the bright orange color they have on their site.
Mhm.
They have a ton of other colors also and designs, cute, like, partnership ones with Disney and stuff.
Mhm.
So there's no other portable blender on the market that comes close to the quality, power, and innovation of the BlendJet 2. They guarantee you'll love it or your money back. So go to blendjet.com and grab yours today. Be sure to use the promo code GGS12 to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. Happy Valentine's Day, you sweet lovers.
Happy Valentine's Day. We love you.
We love you, spooky bitches. I'm Olivia,
And I'm Amy. And this is
and this is Girls Gone
Spooky.
Spooky.
I think,
Um,
is this episode 66 if you count them all?
yeah,
Yeah. Spooky
amazing.
Valentine's Day,
See,
Satan
yeah,
stories.
Satan, satanic bullshit,
Uh-huh.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, well, we've got more stories for you, like we said, and
Mhm.
Amy's up first. So, without further ado, take her away.
Here we go. Okay, so as a refresher, this story is called Tonight I Will Wake Up in 1999 and Relive the Past 23 Years. And it's written by The Eagle Strikes on Reddit. And this is part 3. So in the last part, the main character, learned that, well, he met this stranger from the internet because he posted on Reddit about him being stuck in this time loop. And this stranger led him to think about what happened in 1999 that might make you be stuck there. And he remembered that in 1999, 4 of his classmates went missing. Um, 3 boys, after locking this one poor girl into this house, the Hawthorne home, I think it was called. Um, and so now we're wondering if the Hawthorne house, I think it's called, is like immune to time and space, basically. So here we go. Part 3. So, have you ever squandered an opportunity to prevent something terrible from happening to somebody? Maybe you've been caught in a time loop too. I suppose you might not yet realize. Yeah, whoa. Uh oh, you better reflect on your actions. Yeah. um, okay, you might not yet realize you could reset tomorrow. It could happen on New Year's Eve 2034. Who knows? Over the festive period, I couldn't stop thinking about New Year's Eve 1999. I remembered being terrified of those bullies, just like the little girl. If I had been courageous enough to intervene, I wouldn't have faced the karmic retribution of a time loop. I am still in I3. I don't really know what that is. Um, I don't remember that detail from previous
I don't either.
stories. Anyway, I3. And since my previous post, I was sure to make note of the internet stranger's contact details, lest the glassy eyed man should once again reduce my new friend to a smoldering carcass.
Maybe that means the third loop since he met the internet stranger.
Yeah, like iteration 3 or
Yeah.
instance 3. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good thought.
after the first Reddit post. Because the
Yeah.
first one was when he first thought to post it, the
Mm-hmm.
first part. The second one was when he created No Sleep because it didn't
Mm-hmm.
exist yet. And then the third one was the latest where he woke up
Right.
with his arm all jacked,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. I think
Okay.
that's right. Okay. Good thought. So, still in I3. All right. What's your name? I asked. Harold Langley, the man answered. Harold still wouldn't tell me how he knew about such corrupted things as 11 shrines and spiritual forces. That's the other thing. The 11 shrine is the name
Yeah.
for a place that is not governed by time.
Hmm.
Um, he told me that I already had everything I needed. I knew to go back to the Hawthorne house between 11 p.m. and midnight on New Year's Eve. Any New Year's Eve would do, in fact. Well, I could simply wait to be reset to 1999. Then I could stop the boys from ever locking Pippa in the house, I suggested. Harold shook his head. Even if you were to return to the past and drag the children miles away from the Hawthorne house, the shrine would still entrap them at 11 p.m. on that fateful New
Yeah.
Year's Eve, 1999. Remember, they're already there. The house
Yeah.
exists outside of time. Much like your own loop, no matter where they might travel, their bodies would still reset to that house at 11 p.m. They can only be freed from within the 11 shrine. Sending me back to 1999 is a convoluted way of sending a message, I grumbled. She doesn't know what she's doing, Jake, Harold gently assured me. Pippa is calling for help from an ungodly realm, and that has incurred an abnormality in time. After a long discussion, I could no longer escape the fact that Harold knew far more about this topic than me. I'd spent millennia searching for an answer, and I finally had one. I just couldn't accept it. In truth, I simply didn't want to go anywhere near the Hawthorne house. It imbued me with unspeakable thoughts. Every time I walked past it, I felt evilness surge through me. And I know that every child in my neighborhood felt the same way. The Hawthorns had died decades before our time, but we knew that something was deeply wrong with the building they'd left behind. The house felt like a living, unfeeling thing. It was crooked, out of place, ill intentioned. Yeah. New Year's Eve 2022. The Hawthorne house was exactly as I remembered it, though the neighborhood was certainly much livelier. There were no missing posters, and the roads were littered with revelers preparing for the new year that I had spent ceaseless centuries attempting to reach. 10:41 p.m. 19 minutes until I would reset, unless the glassy-eyed man finds and ends me. If Harold were correct, my only salvation would be to enter the Hawthorne house at 11 o'clock in the evening. The shrine would open. There's something much more frightening about seeing a haunted house in the real world. I have never minded eerie buildings in photographs or films, but the Hawthorne house is the most terrifying place I have ever visited. I gently walked from the moss covered gate to the fatigued front door, which was painted a long faded blue. In the front yard, there is an unlabeled stone cross submerged in overgrown, withered grass blades. There are 3 stories to the neglected building. Dark chasms lay behind the glassy panes, and the attic had a misted oval window. I felt a piercing pang of horror in my chest at the sight of a black shape moving behind the glass. Haunted.
His writing is so good.
I can
I
picture
really like
everything.
it. Me
Yeah.
too. I
Yes.
really like it.
And as I was searching this, I noticed he has another story um,
Oh,
series on Reddit
okay.
that seems to be about being stuck in a video game. So that
Ooh,
could be cool.
okay. Ooh,
I haven't
I
read
love
it,
it.
but we'll see. Maybe that's next.
Hell
Um,
yeah.
okay. Other than a private property sign on the front gate, there was nothing to ward away intruders. There was no barricade across the rotting front door, and it was unlocked, so it creakily inched open with a light push. Perhaps the mere sight of the horrid place was enough to deter most people from trespassing. I wish that I could have the same luxury. As I entered the Hawthorne house, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and lit the dismal place with my torch. I think he's British. Um,
Mm.
Revealing,
Yeah.
yeah, because some of it is spelled in British spelling.
Oh.
Um, so, with his torch, revealing a hallway that led onto a ginormous staircase. There was an open doorway on the left hand side of the hallway, and it led onto the lounge. I strolled into the dusty, asbestos riddled death trap. In the living area, there was a sofa which had been partially devoured by vermin, but I collapsed onto it and waited. 11 p.m. My heart stopped. I wasn't fading away. I was still in the present. No, this isn't the present, I reminded myself. The Hawthorne house exists outside of time. Nevertheless, my phone's lock screen displayed 2300, which was good enough for me. I wasn't resetting. You made it. That was the important thing. Before I could wrap my mind around that, however, I noticed something. The walls were groaning. Chest undulating in terror, I leapt to my feet. The whining foundations of the house seemed to lament my presence. I took a look at the world outside of the mucky lounge windows. My dimly lit neighborhood was rapidly vanishing from view. Within seconds, everything beyond the exterior of the house was black. The bridge to the physical realm was gone. um, yeah, he's stuck. Though time was a foreign concept in that shrine to evil, I still felt that it shouldn't be wasted. I had no idea what happened to the children, and I had no idea what was about to happen to me. I needed to find them. Then I could focus on finding a way to reopen the bridge and escape. I don't know how to exit an 11 shrine, Harold had quietly admitted to me. Time works differently in there. I think it only opens a bridge to our world when it wants to do so. So, I suppose you have to give it something that it wants more than Pippa and those boys. Those words rung in my head. I found myself meandering in the living room of that lost house. There was a large frame above the fireplace. Using my phone light, I studied the unnerving canvas that loomed above me. It was a painting of the Hawthorne house in its bygone glory days. I did not recognize the three people standing in front of the house, but I assumed it had to be the Hawthorne family. The mother and father were prim and proper. They must have lived in the 1940s, judging by their fashion, but I wasn't really looking at them. I was looking at their boy. He was a skeletal thing. His flesh seemed to cling tightly to the outline of his skull. The indignant expression on his face was communicated through joyless eyes and thin lips. He had a complexion that was almost wholly white, and that, strangely, gave the jubilant expressions on his parents' faces a sinister undertone. Why were they so happy? Their son appeared half dead. Needless to say, the painting absolutely horrified me, but everything in that house horrified me. Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt.
it's okay.
Two men and a woman, two little boys and a little girl,
Hmm.
like
Yeah,
threes, like unholy trinity kind of vibes.
yeah, true. Ooh,
Weird.
spooky. Yeah, that, well, I guess we'll find out. Seems like
Yeah,
they were hurting their son, maybe?
maybe.
I don't know.
Or devil worshippers or something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
we'll
Ooh.
see. The swirling, nightmarish colors of the artwork felt like a fever dream. In the pristine oval window at the top of the painted house, there was movement. The paint was actually moving. Unlike the movement I'd seen in the real life oval window, these painted shapes were crystal clear. Pippa and the three bullies. Their mouths were agape, much like the man in the scream, and they were huddling together, ferociously banging their tiny fists on the window. As if that weren't horrifying enough, there was more movement in the picture. The painted mother turned around and started strolling along the path, heading towards the house. The sun was decaying before my very eyes. His painted form seemed to be crumbling. Yet the father smiled, and the mother continued walking towards the house.
Oh, God.
Yeah, she reached the front door. Thumping followed. And I do not simply mean that I saw the painted mother thump the painted door. There was a thumping sound on the real life door, which was in the hallway behind me. A scary. A blood curdling screech followed. It was a woman, I suppose, but her voice no longer sounded human. There was a guttural, distorted quality to it. Don't take my child from me. I had no desire to hang around and find out what she meant. I sprinted from the living room to the hallway, praying the front door would hold, and I hauled my body up the rotting stairs two at a time. Plunging into the darkness, I prepared for the door to fly from its hinges. The thing for which I did not prepare was to suddenly find myself standing on a well lit, refurbished landing. The Hawthorne house had morphed into a lavish home. From the top of the staircase, I turned to face the downstairs hallway. The banging on the front door had ceased, and it opened to reveal the mother. She was an ordinary person, not a frightening apparition. I realized I had wandered through a portal in time. I would say my initial guess had been accurate. It seemed to be a snapshot of the 1940s. Jonathan, tell Bert that dinner will be ready in half an hour, the mother shouted. He's not in here, Sarah, Jonathan replied. The father's ghost startled me, though the couple seemed much jollier in this memory. He strolled straight through my body and walked down the stairs. Well, I told the boy that he could only play until I finished taking down the laundry, Sarah huffed. He was with the Dalton boys across the road, Jonathan said, now striding across the downstairs hallway. I'll fetch him. The ghosts of the parents evaporated, and the house transported to a different moment in time. There was crying from a room farther down the landing. As I walked towards it, I noticed more frames on the walls. They were less macabre than the portrait I'd seen in the living room. There were 3 paintings of the individual Hawthorne family members. Seeing an ajar door on the left side of the landing, I peered through the slight opening. The sobbing mother was sitting at her dressing table, which faced away from the doorway. I could only see the back of her body. The father was holding her shoulders and futilely striving to console her. I cannot live without him, Jonathan, she wailed. A mother cannot live without her baby. You shan't have to do that, Jonathan promised. I have found a way to return his soul to us. Francis acquired some books. There are rituals that can help, but they come with a price, so any price, Sarah coldly interrupted. And what of the boys who murdered our child? Jonathan asked. Death would be too merciful, she said. I agree. From my readings, I have learned ways in which we could make them suffer. If we could transform this house into unhallowed ground, we could ensnare their souls and eternally trap them here. They would become part of the building's woodwork. We would have to build an 11 shrine on the eve of the new year. There might be consequences for others who step foot on this land, but do it, Sarah icily whispered. The world washed away again. I saw brief flashes of the parents in their bedroom. They were drawing bloody patterns on the walls. I heard sourceless screams, cries of anguish from who I only assume must have been the children who murdered Bert. The jigsaw pieces were sliding together. The souls of Bert's killers were embedded in the Hawthorne house. Sarah and Jonathan had succeeded, But had they also managed to resurrect their child? I shuddered, remembering the ghastly painting of a withering Bert in the living room. Something told me that a happily ever after hadn't been on the cards for the fractured family. The lights extinguished, the fresh decor aged in seconds, returning the Hawthorne house to the present. Well, I suppose I wasn't really experiencing any sort of time period. Everything faded away except for one thing, one person, the mother. She was still sitting at her dressing table, facing away from the doorway. Her vanity mirror was cracked and coated in filth. I couldn't see her reflection. Her clothes were dusty and tattered. Her once beautiful blonde hair was withered, and she was stroking it with a hairbrush. Her strokes were so vicious that clumps of hair were ripping from her head. No way, I'm not going in there. I attempted to cautiously back away from the door, but floorboards betrayed me. They moaned beneath my weight. The hairbrushing abruptly stopped. The old, rickety vanity stool squeaked as the mother adjusted herself. I expected her to twist her entire body around to face me, but she didn't. Instead, she simply twisted her head. She twisted beyond breaking point. She twisted her head 180 degrees. Blech. What was even
Big.
yeah, no. What was even ghastlier, however, was the face which gazed upon me. It was decomposing. Maggots swam through the cavities in the mother's flesh. Her lipless mouth opened, revealing rotten teeth. She did not smile as she had in the painting. "Where is my son?" her half human voice cried. To protect itself, my haunted brain had detached from reality. So when the bedroom door slammed shut, I was relieved and petrified in equal measure. I was relieved to be free of the mother's ghoulish gaze, but I was petrified of what I would face next. Remembering why I had come to the Hawthorne house, I resolved to keep searching for Pippa and the boys. I didn't know what kind of demonic specter I'd just seen in the bedroom, and I didn't want to know. Standing in the upstairs hallway, desperately trying to catch my breath, I became aware of a squelching sound. I cast my phone torch onto the wall behind me. A black liquid of unknown composition had scrawled 3 direful words. "Father is home." Whose father? Um, okay, moving my torch onto the paintings, I saw Bert and Sarah in their portraits. The third painting, on the other hand, was merely a black canvas. Jonathan had left his portrait. I heard the front door open and slam shut. Loud footsteps moved with immense speed and purpose, clunking up the stairs. Crying in utterly primal fear, I ran towards the far end of the landing. I opened the final door on the left, hearing floorboards groan beneath the weight of some hulking, monstrous entity. For a split second before I stepped through the open doorway, I caught a glimpse of something in the glow of my phone light. The father was far taller and wider than he had appeared in the flashbacks. His gargantuan, ghostly form could barely squeeze through the upstairs corridor. His decomposing face was much like that of his wife, but his eyes were bloody spheres in his sockets. Is he the glassy-eyed man?
I know. That's what I'm thinking.
I slammed the door behind me and locked it. There was a cacophony of fist pounding on the door. The father said nothing. His fury spoke far louder than words. I found myself in a second bedroom, Bert's bedroom. Heart still not slowing, the frights did not cease. "Jake?" A disembodied girl's voice hissed. I froze. "It's Pippa," she continued. "We're in the hideaway. We've been here for months." "Where's the hideaway?" I asked. The banging on the bedroom door finally quieted. Pippa whispered again. "Behind the wardrobe," she said. "Hurry, I think they heard me." I found the wardrobe. I know. I found the wardrobe on the left-hand wall and started to push it to the side. It was surprisingly light. Once it was a few feet to the right, a small opening was revealed in the wall behind it. I couldn't see anything inside the darkened doorway, but I had to press forward. I used my phone to light the way, and I found myself ascending a small set of stairs. Of course, the attic with the oval window. I tentatively clambered up the staircase, keeping my eyes and ears keenly peeled for anything untoward. When I reached the top, I stretched my hand towards the door handle before me. Creaking. An icy breath skirted across my left ear. Something was standing on the step behind me. They murdered him, a voice groaned. I didn't need to turn my head. I knew it was the mother. Quivering, I lightly pressed the standby button to switch off the screen. On the dark, glassy surface of my phone, I saw the walking corpse of the half-decayed mother standing just behind me. Her gaunt face was illuminated by my torchlight. I screamed in terror, but I was quickly silenced by a gnarled, bony hand that clasped over my mouth. That only made me scream louder. I shook the creature off me, whirled around, and she was gone. Too frightened to spend another minute in this house of nightmares, I proceeded to repeatedly slam my shoulder into the attic door. Finally, it gave way. I cast the phone light into the attic, expecting to be met with emptiness, but I turned to the right to find myself looking upon 4 malnourished children who were shivering beneath the oval window. The world outside remained an endless void, but that was besides the point. I'd done it. I'd found the girl who had been trapping me in the loop for thousands of years. It hadn't been a fruitless endeavor. The children were crying incessantly. "I'm so sorry," Pippa said. "I was just so scared. Can you help us to leave this place?" "We didn't mean to do it," one of the boys whimpered. "The voices made us lock her in here," another boy added. Yikes. The third boy simply nodded, seemingly too traumatized to speak. "Okay," I eventually managed to say. "Do any of you know something that could help us to escape?" Their eyes widened. "You don't know how to free us?" one of the boys shakily asked. I didn't respond. My mind was whirring. I thought about everything Harold had told me. Then I realized I didn't need his help. I needed the help of the people who had created the shrine. "Sarah!" I screamed. "Jonathan!" "What are you doing?" Pippa asked, horrified. "We need to get away from them." Before I could reply, the wall at the far end of the attic started to ripple. Like swimmers coming to the surface of a pool, the dreadful mother and father seeped through the torn wallpaper. The children screeched, but I stood my ground, keeping the torchlight on the horrible abominations that were striding toward us. "Is your son buried in the front garden?" I asked. No reply. The emotionless demons looked upon me with their awful eyes. "If you create a bridge back to the real world, I could return him to you," I said. "That's what you want, isn't it?" The mother started to walk toward me, and I trembled in immobilizing terror. "He should be here with us," she wheezed. "Open the bridge," I repeated. "You can't leave the house, can you? I can return his bones to you. I can give you peace, but you must return all of us to our rightful places on our rightful timelines." The ghouls stared for a long time. The only sound in that haunted room was the blubbering of the 4 children who were hiding behind me. I received my answer in the form of light pouring into the room. Not light from my phone, light from the oval window. I and the children turned to face the real world. Fireworks filled the sky. As we watched with teary eyes, the children dissipated. The outside world, in turn, rapidly changed. The sun rose and set thousands of times in the matter of seconds. Years were passing. When the earth eventually slowed, I knew it was 2022 again. "Return our son," the father wheezed. When I turned to face them, the terrifying entities were gone. I sprinted down the stairs from the attic, bounded across Bert's bedroom, flung my panicked body along the hallway, and started to sprint down the main staircase. Gliding across the hallway towards the open door, I prepared to taste freedom. Scorching agony. Horrified, I found myself engulfed in darkness before being thrown onto the floor of the hallway. I bellowed in pain, feeling a searing sensation across my skin. "No," I whined in horror. the glassy eyed man. He was standing on the front porch, obstructing what seemed to be the only exit from this house of hellish tricks. He was little more than a shadow, filling the doorway with his black form and white pinpricks. I fixed it, I yelled. The loop is over. No response from the inhuman entity. No movement. I checked the time on my phone. 11:02 p.m. It's after 11 o'clock and I have not reset, I explained. The loop is over. After an eternal moment, the shadow faded into the blackness. The glassy pinpricks merged with the night sky, joining a canopy of twinkling stars. My strained heart finally loosened. Gingerly, I attempted to leave the house. I took a step onto the porch. Nothing stopped me. I hurried into the front yard and tore at the grass with my bare hands. Dirt under my half-broken nails, I quickly dug my way to the cluster of bones that the Hawthorne parents had buried. Why did they not keep the bones in the house? Did they ever manage to resurrect their son? Why were their souls trapped in the 11 shrine with their son's murderers? So many unanswered questions. I delicately and respectfully placed the pile of bones inside the main hallway, quickly exiting the Hawthorne house. As I tiptoed backwards, keeping my eye on the open front door, I saw a bony hand stretch across the wooden floor and drag Bert's remnants out of view. Yeah. As I passed through the gate, the door to the Hawthorne house swung shut. That was 15 minutes ago, and I hope, beyond all hope, to never reopen that terrible chapter of my life. At this very moment, I find myself sitting on the curb, typing my update and staring vacantly at swarms of partygoers. They're blissfully unaware of the horrors lurking in the abhorrent building just behind me. 11:22 p.m. I've never lived beyond 11 p.m. on December 31st, 2022. That must be a promising sign. Surely I'm free. At 11 p.m., I didn't wake up in 1999. Pippa must have released me, but has the Hawthorne house released me? Has the glassy-eyed man released me? I suppose I'll never have a definite answer. I'll always wince in terror at the sight of cavernous crevices. I'll always look for those white eyes. I cannot conquer the unknown, but that's not my battle. After thousands of torturous years, I would simply settle for seeing January 1st, 2023. At midnight, let's hope I manage to post a comment. And he did. I can't believe it. 2023. I scurried home and tightly embraced each of my family members. I wanted to kiss you. It's 2 minutes past midnight, my wife said, scowling. It took you a long time to get here. She has no idea. And that's the end.
Oh my God, that's
I know. Great job, the Eagle Strikes. I loved
wow.
it.
Wow, wow, wow. I love that so much. Oh,
Hooray. All right, David.
David. Okay, so this is part 4 of 5. So we have one more after this.
Excellent.
Okay, recap on part 3. They leave the house, they go to their priest, Father Brown's house, and stay there for a little bit while they're trying to basically find an exorcist. The priest says there's no such thing as ghosts, but demons.
They're around.
Demons. So they find this Irish exorcist, allegedly, who they go back to the house, and it's basically like full poltergeist
Right.
status.
Scary.
Super scary. David's trying to kill Jasmine, has like absolutely targeted her.
Mhm.
So they end up finally fleeing out of the house again. The exorcist runs for the hills, and they go back to Father Brown's house. Now, Jasmine is a little bit injured from her encounter with David, and so Father Brown brings her into the bathroom to fix up her wound. It's like a burn mark on her ankle. And in the mirror, his face kind of morphs into that of David's.
Yeah.
So she goes screaming from the room, running, and Father Brown is like, "Oh my God, what?" So we don't know what happened. Like, is Father Brown in on it?
Yeah.
Did David possess
Possessed,
him?
right?
Or did he mark her when he burned her? Like, what's the deal? So
Yeah. Weren't they
part Or
speculating now, like her brother said, well, what if he's attached to Jasmine?
yeah,
So
like
they're
what if she's
wondering,
haunted, not the
yeah,
house? Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Okay. As much as I wanted to ignore it, as much as I wanted to trust Father Brown, I couldn't. I'd seen David in the mirror. There was a point in my life that I might have dismissed it as what my mother called an overactive imagination. There was a time where I would have moved on with my life and mentioned it to Jack or my mom later, but that time of innocence was long gone. The child I'd once been was dead. She died when David had broken into her room, when he'd threatened her life with a flying spade, when he'd called her a name through a broken radio. I no longer had the luxury of assuming the best in people. I had been thrown into a world composed entirely of uncertainty and insecurity, only to emerge jaded. In that moment, I didn't know what it meant that I had seen David in the mirror. I only knew that it made the man who had given us shelter, who had offered us his home and his love, dangerous. The sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach returned. No longer was Father Brown's soft-spoken, gentle ways calming. Instead, they hearkened to a time in which I'd been naive enough to trust David. Jasmine, I need you to breathe, sweetheart. Father Brown's voice broke through my thoughts. I tried to pull away, fresh waves of fear washing over me. My fists shot out, desperately trying to connect with anything solid. Over and over I hit his arms, but his vice-like grip never wavered. He went to his knees, leveling with me. His eyes met mine as I screamed, wordlessly in absolute horror. What happened, honey? What just happened? Why are you so scared? I was frantically trying to get away, desperately searching for a way out of his grasp. What's going on? My mother's voice rang through the hall. I jumped. Father Brown's grip never loosened. The points where his fingers dug into my arms were starting to ache. I was going to bruise. Is everything okay? Father Brown looked at her, concern etched into his brow. I don't know. He sounded distraught, as though he were genuinely worried about what was happening. I wanted to believe that he was, but I couldn't let myself think anything more than the monster that had been terrorizing my family for weeks. His eyes met mine. Jasmine, baby, I need you to breathe. Tell me what happened. My gut quivered with anxiety and terror. I knew what I'd seen. I knew I saw David in that mirror. I also knew I couldn't get away from him on my own. He was 3 times my size. My only hope was the aid of a family member, and now was my chance, but my frightened mind couldn't compose the words I needed. Instead, I offered only a shouted, vague explanation. He's not Father Brown. I watched my mother with wide, tear-filled eyes. I willed her to believe me. I silently begged her to understand what I was saying because my young, terror-riddled mind couldn't formulate much else of a response. What? Father Brown asked. Confusion swept over his face. His fingers loosened and he released me. I fell back, landing on my butt. Quickly, I rose to my feet and scurried to my mother, where I latched onto her leg. Finally, out of Father Brown's grasp, my mind and my mouth began to work in tandem again. It's David, I shrieked. It's David. I saw him in the mirror. I saw him. Father Brown watched me with curious eyes. He cocked his head, his eyes softening. Jasmine, did you see David in the mirror while we were in the bathroom? He asked. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to hit him for being stupid. Why was he asking me that? I just said that, didn't I? Instead, I simply scowled at him and nodded. Are you absolutely certain? He asked. I need you to be positive about this. I molded to my mother's side, watching him with cautious, careful eyes. I wouldn't fall prey to David again. I wouldn't find myself locked in a room with his eyeless, soulless self again. I'm sure, I growled. My lip curled up in disgust as I spoke. I was doing what I could to make it clear that I had no interest in talking with him any further. Father Brown's face turned to stone. His features became hard and almost angry. Excuse me, he said as he stood and crossed the room, heading toward his office. I have to make a few phone calls. My mother pulled me into the bathroom and applied the aloe ointment to my burned skin. She asked me to tell her what happened. I recounted the events to her, only for her to purse her lips and fall silent. I was so used to her ignoring the happening, so used to her trying to explain it all away, that when she didn't, I got nervous. I think her quiet acceptance of it was the most unsettling things I'd ever experienced. It seemed that she'd given up on ignoring David. For one reason or another, the very idea of her giving up really hurt. I pushed the thoughts away because there was something much more pressing to focus on: the mirror. I kept my eyes on it the entire time. David never appeared. For the next several days, I kept my distance from the father. He, my parents, and Jack spent their time whispering among one another. I didn't get an opportunity to hear much, just bits and pieces. I'd managed to piece together that Brett had been a psychic. I didn't know what that meant at the time and resorted to asking Jack, who told me there were people who could see ghosts. I reasoned that I must have been a psychic too, since I could see David before anyone else could. That's interesting. This new information concerned me because Father Brown kept calling him a charlatan. Another thing I didn't understand, when I asked Jack about that word, he informed me that they were bad. That made my stomach hurt. I wondered if it meant I was bad too. The last thing I gathered from listening in on conversations I shouldn't have been listening to was that someone very important was going to go to our house. They had planned to bless it. I didn't know what that meant either, but I didn't want to ask Jack, afraid he'd figure out I'd been eavesdropping. The weeks dragged by. We stayed with Father Brown throughout the month leading into the next. Strict rules were set in place for reasons I didn't understand. We weren't allowed to leave the home for any reason. Every morning, noon and night, we had to pray with Father Brown. He would say a bunch of words I didn't understand at the time because I'd never heard Latin. Looking back, it was likely some sort of exorcism ritual. While we repeated these words, Father Brown would pour water over our heads. I remember being annoyed that my hair was constantly damp. We slept in what I had affectionately begun to call the dog pile on the living room floor. I could usually be found curled up in Jack's arms while Jim and Johnny slept just to our right. Mom and Dad slept on the floor in Father Brown's basement because there was no room upstairs for them. We never went to school. Dad would run to the office once every Monday to get our schoolwork and textbooks. We'd complete the homework in the safety of Father Brown's house, and Dad would return the work the next Monday only to get more. It was a boring cycle that made my head hurt and my stomach churn every time I thought about it, but I kept a smile on my face and reminded myself that it was so much better than the nights we'd spent huddled around one another in terror. It was mid-October when my mom and dad sat us down and told us David was gone. We were informed that we were leaving that same night. With uncertainty in my eyes and questions on my lips, I packed up my belongings. We said goodbye to Father Brown, and I cried. He'd become a rather familiar and comforting person in my life, and I really didn't want to give that up. The drive home was silent. I think each of us had our doubts about the home being safe, but none of us vocalized them. So my father parked in the same place he always had, and I remember touching the cracked glass of my window as he put the car in park. I half expected something sharp and metal to crash into it, but nothing happened, and soon I found myself walking up the wooden stairs and into the home. When once it had felt hot, clammy, and heavy, now the air was thin and pure, just as it always was at Father Brown's home. I tread through the kitchen, trying not to think of why the big window was missing. I looked around the floor for any signs of the broken dishes, but found none. Whoever had been here to do whatever it was they did must have cleaned it up. They'd also replaced our stove with a new, shiny black one. It didn't match the rest of our kitchen, but it was nice. I continued toward the staircase, my eyes darting to the hallway. My stomach churned as I listened for the sound of the shower. Nothing. Just as I rounded the corner, heading up the stairs to my room, I noticed the scratch marks on the floor. No amount of scrubbing could erase away the evidence of my struggle with David. I felt as though I couldn't catch my breath, but for the sake of everyone else, I pushed away the tears that threatened to spring to life and ran up the stairs. We packed our stuff into our rooms, although I made it clear that I wasn't going to mine alone. Jack offered to come with me. He let me sit on my bed while he hung up my clothes and chattered to me about things that didn't matter. But my eyes stayed glued to the tree, the one that stood just outside my window, the one Mittens and her kittens had been hung from. I swallowed hard. I'd forgotten about the cats.
Yeah.
I swallowed hard and stood up, trying to find anything at all to take my mind off David. Unfortunately, the first thing to catch my attention was my broken door. I ran a hand along the sharp, jagged edge, splinters bit at my fingertips. I couldn't stop my mind from wandering to that night, the first night David had shown me who he really was. Goosebumps rose along my flesh, and a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature danced down my spine. I felt stupid and used. I felt wronged and misled. I wanted to know why David would have done such a thing to me. Jazzy? I jumped at the sound of my name. Flashes of an eyeless David sprang to life in my mind. I spun around, my hand over my heart, my eyes wide with panic. A small squeak fled my lips. Jack stood on the other side of the room, his hands raised in surrender. Jazzy, it's okay, he promised. Just me. You're okay. I struggled to catch my breath and nodded. Yeah, I answered, my eyes darting around the room in search of my own personal monster, but he was nowhere to be found. Jack? I asked, my head craned upward as I stared to my brother. It was the first time I realized how very much he looked like Dad. His beard was reddish-brown instead of dark and gray, but he had the same strong cheekbones and masculine features my father did. He had the same sharp eyes that said he was smarter than he let on. They shared the same hairline and the same build. Jack really did look like a younger version of my father. Why is it safe now? I asked, concerned that Mom and Dad were wrong. Everyone is so sure David isn't going to come back, but I saw him in the mirror that one time. I insisted, biting my lower lip. I don't think anyone believes me, though. Jack's eyes softened. His hand went up to his chin, brushing at his beard as he regarded me with uncertain eyes. Finally, he sighed and motioned for me to come to him. He sat on my bed and pulled me up on his lap. Jazzy, I don't understand any of this nearly as well as Father Brown does, but I'll tell you what I know. David is a demon, and he's from hell. Just like other demons, he wanders the earth and looks for innocent people like you to mess with. His words made me feel like I was going to vomit. I squirmed uncomfortably, but all the same, I knew I needed to know what happened. Jack swallowed hard and paused for a long time. I placed a hand on his, trying to make him feel better. Jack smiled, a small, sad laugh trickling from between his lips. He rubbed my back and took a deep breath. Demons can attach themselves to places or people, and David attached himself to you. It's why he followed us to the woods, and why you saw him at Father Brown's house. My breath caught in my throat. I was haunted. I felt sick, and my skin crawled. Father Brown and some of the higher-ups at the church got together. They decided upon the best way to handle this, and they came to the house. Every day they prayed here. They blessed it. They asked the people from church to come out and pray as well. Father Brown didn't tell me much about what happened. All I know is that at first David was acting out. He knocked things over, he broke things, he pushed people, and even locked the doors so the priests and the churchgoers couldn't get inside. Jack's hand landed on my own, and he squeezed it tightly. But in the end, God won, because God is bigger than any demon, he swore. And now we're safe, thanks to Father Brown and all the men and women who helped. He smiled a wide, genuine smile. I couldn't decide in that moment how I felt. There was a strange cocktail of emotions running through me. Guilt, love, hatred, gratitude. They swirled around inside of me, mingling with one another and leaving me shrouded in confusion. I simply gave a half-hearted nod and fell silent. I leaned into Jack, curling up on his lap. His body heat reminded me that I wasn't alone. Listening to the beat of his heart and the slow intake and exhale of breath calmed me. I wrapped my arms tightly around him and molded to him. I don't know how long I stayed like that, holding on to Jack as though he were the last solid thing on the planet, but eventually one thought screamed so loudly in my mind I couldn't ignore it. It penetrated the haze of confusion that had shrouded me and spilled from my lips. I'm not sleeping in here alone, I announced, leaving absolutely no room for argument. I'd sleep outside if I had to, but under no circumstances was I ever sleeping in that godforsaken room again. Johnny and Jim are sleeping in their room, and I don't think they'll let me sleep with them. Can I sleep with you? He gave a nod. Of course, he answered, but I'm sleeping in the living room right now. He offered no explanation, although I thought it was probably because we'd become rather accustomed to falling asleep with the movie playing on the television. Father Brown had suggested it the first few nights. It had caught on and stuck, and no one had tried to put a stop to it, so it simply never ended. I crinkled my nose in disgust and stuck out my tongue. No thanks, I answered, shaking my head. I had absolutely no interest in sleeping down there. I could barely even look in that room without seeing David standing behind that chair like he had the night we'd fled the home for Father Brown's. Jack looked down to me thoughtfully. Why don't you see if you can sleep in Mom and Dad's room with them? He asked. I hopped off his lap and did just that. My parents agreed without much thought before asking me if I was done putting my things away. I proudly announced that I was, leaving out the fact that Jack had actually done everything. My pride was instantly dashed when I was immediately put to work. My mother and I spent the day trying to scrub down and repair what we could. The boys got to work repairing the flooring and repainting the entire house. For the first 2 weeks, I refused to enter any room by myself, which made the chores incredibly difficult. I'd be scrubbing the counters or doing dishes when my mother would announce that she had to go to the bathroom and would be right back. But I wasn't having any of that. I'd pick Joey up and stand outside the door while Mom did whatever it was she needed to do. Other aspects of my life changed just as drastically. Whereas the bridge had once been my favorite place to go, I wouldn't go near it at all. I went as far as absolutely insisting that if we were driving somewhere, we took the long way, going over the highway and crossing over a different bridge 7 miles down the road. I panicked when a family member left for too long. I covered all the mirrors in the house with sheets and pillowcases and had a meltdown any time any of them were removed. At night, I insisted upon sleeping in my parents' bed. I would wake my father or mother every time I needed to use the bathroom and demand they come with me and just stand outside the door. This became our reality, and it stuck for a long time. So long, in fact, that at one point my mother wanted to send me to therapy. My father refused, reminding her that I'd likely be regarded as insane if I ever told a mental health professional what had happened in our home, so my mother gave up that idea almost instantly. While the first month or two was clunky, I filled with a certain kind of unease that put me on edge. It eventually did get better. Slowly, I started to accept that David had indeed left. The realization allowed me to stop following my mother everywhere, and while I wouldn't be on a separate floor from everyone else, I would go into separate rooms from time to time. As the weeks passed and fears began to melt away, I began to fall in love with our home and our property again. Slowly, I became more adventurous. I began exploring the property on my own, although I still kept my distance from the bridge. At first, I started going just past the barn and back, but eventually I craved more. I wanted to explore. I wanted to find bugs and snakes. I wanted to count what wildlife I could see. I wanted more from life than being stuck in a home afraid of the rooms that surrounded me. So one day I laced up my tall hiking boots, packed 2 bottles of water, and headed out into the vast expansion of the back fields. My father had never planted anything, insisting every year that we'd be fencing it in and getting cows. I was always thrilled with that prospect, but somehow it never happened. I found myself incredibly thankful for my father's procrastination. The massively overgrown bush provided a fantastic hiking trail. As I got farther and farther away from my home, and what fear I had of David shed itself entirely, I began to see the beauty in the nature around me. Grassy hills rolled over the horizon, colorful trees dotted the landscape. A creek sliced through the earth like a vein, babbling as it rushed over stones. It was like something straight out of a painting. I found myself wondering how I'd never noticed how very beautiful our backyard was, or how I'd ever managed to be bored a day in my life. This became my new ritual. Instead of finding ways to get to the bridge, I'd hike out into the field until my home was just a small dot, and then I'd hike back. It seemed like every time I did it, I found a new bug that I'd never seen before. I began making friends with arachnids again, and for the first time in months, I felt normal. With the realization that we were free and safe came the start of school. Until then, my father was still bringing home our work and turning it into the office on Mondays. My grades soared. I made friends for the first time in my life. Life couldn't have possibly been better. We had nearly 4 solid months of pure bliss. We'd managed to repair everything in the home, from the peeling paint to the wilted garden to the flooring indoors. Everything was back the way it should have been. Johnny and I were even on decent speaking terms, something that hadn't happened since I first started talking to David. In fact, the only sign that anything had ever been wrong at all was the simple fact that I refused to sleep in my own bed. I still curled up directly in between my mother and father. The school weeks came and went. Johnny, Jim, and I were doing exceptionally well, and so one Friday night, Jack gathered us together and told us he'd take us to a movie as a reward. I was so excited. We hadn't decided on which one yet, but I didn't really care. I would have sat through just about anything to get my hands on a bag of popcorn and a cherry icy.
Oh,
Same,
can
girl.
relate to that.
Oh, that sounds so fire. It was well past midnight, and I was still tossing and turning, trying to force myself to sleep, but I couldn't lay still with all the excitement. I turned over for the millionth time when the baby monitor buzzed with a sudden burst of static. My body went rigid. I wanted to reach out and shake my dad awake, but I was filled with a sudden dread that made me believe if I moved, something terrible would happen. So I stayed as still as I could, taking small breaths, trying to make myself invisible. I waited for another noise for what seemed like hours. I'd nearly managed to convince myself that the old monitor had just glitched when a hoarse, menacing voice began to half sing, half talk into the radio. Hush, little baby.
No.
It sang in a low growl. Its words were slow and mildly distorted. Don't say a word. My father was up and out of the bed before I had time to scream. My mother shrieked something about her baby and leapt out of bed, tearing down the hallway out of sight. No, 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 my father shouted over the pounding of his fists against the wood. There's no fucking lock on the doors. How is it locked? My stomach dropped. I couldn't catch my breath. It was happening again. It was happening again. A wheezing breath rattled from the monitor. Mama's gonna buy you. The voice cut out as heavy fists pounded against the door again. A mockingbird, it groaned and wheezed, sounding like death incarnate. Joey began to whine, a small, pathetic sort of sound that rippled through the silence of the bedroom and tore at my heart. I felt useless. Why was I just laying here while David terrorized my brother? Because I was a chicken. The whining began to build to small fussing. A slow hiss, unlike that of a snake, echoed through the monitor. I said, hush, the gruff voice reminded him. Please don't cry, I begged through tears as I wrapped myself in the blanket. I couldn't even imagine what David might do to Joey if he cried. But my pleas fell on deaf ears, and soon Joey's desperate wails echoed through the halls. What's going on? Jack's groggy voice called from the other side of the hallway. It's happening again, my mother screamed. Someone, probably Jack, dashed through the hall and hit the door so hard I felt it shake from my place in the bed. I could hear it begin to give way from the monitor. The monitor cut out for 3 entire seconds, and those were the longest moments of my life. I strained my ears, trying to listen for Joey's cries from down the hall, but hearing nothing. My mind wandered into dark places. Had David killed him? Had he killed my brother? Finally, the static returned, and mercifully, the only thing that could be heard was Joey's desperate crying. I held my breath, listening intently, waiting for the sound of David's wheezing. Joey was still screaming from the monitor, and I could hear my frantic parents as they shouted from just the other side of the door. Again and again, someone hit the heavy wood, but Joey's door was heavier than mine had been. It was harder to break down. I had my doubts that they'd reached him in time. I prayed that he wasn't being hurt. Fuck, this isn't going to work, Jack shouted. I could hear the panic in his voice. Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I was so sure in that moment that Joey was going to die. I was so sure that nothing in the world could be worse or more frightening. I was wrong. Creak. Thump. Creak. Thump.
No.
The sound went on and on. It was close, so close that I was sure it was coming from inside the bedroom. My hands and feet tingled, my body went cold, a deep ache beginning in my stomach. I could feel the thuds vibrate through the wall that the bed was pushed up against. My heart caught in my throat, and I tried to convince myself that the noise was coming from the monitor, but I knew that was bullshit. It was distinct, very different from the frantic thudding of fists against the door to my little brother's room, separate from the desperate screams of my parents as they tried to rescue their youngest child from the clutches of the demon. They were systematic, almost as if timed. There was something about the calm, languid way they happened that was absolutely maddening. It took me a solid minute to get up the courage to peek out from under the blankets. Even as I did it, I moved as slowly as I could so as not to draw attention to myself. My breath hitched. I tried to scream or gasp, but my lungs were deflated. They pleaded for oxygen that I couldn't give them. A cold sweat had begun to bead along my brow, and ice ran through my veins. I could have sworn my heart stopped. Sitting upon my mother's rocker, hands folded neatly in his lap, was David. He swung his feet sweetly, just inches above the wooden floor. The chair creaked as it rocked and thumped against the wall time and time again. Had his eyes not been missing, he might have actually looked sweet, sitting there upon a too-big chair. His attention snapped to me, empty sockets locked onto my form, his brows pulled down into a scowl, his lips turned down into a deep frown, and his tongue darted out of his lips, forked, like that of a snake.
Oh.
I nearly vomited. Bye, oh baby bunkin, the words leaked from him like a sickness, sounding sinister and dangerous. David's going hunting, he hissed. The tongue, long, flat, and forked, snaked from between his lips. David slid off the chair and moved like liquid, as though he had muscles and bones in places that I did not. He dropped to his knees and began to crawl toward me. There was something about seeing him on the ground, eyeless,
Ew.
but staring into my soul all the time, forked tongue darting from between his lips that left me breathless.
Ooh.
I was entirely unable to speak or even scream. Never had I been more frightened. Not when the house had been flooded or when he'd trapped me in my room. Not when he'd hung our cats from the tree. Something about how he moved reduced me to nothing more than a sobbing mess. I pleaded with God to make him go away. I silently begged for him to stop the monster that had made it his life's work to fuck with me, but it was no use. David crawled across the floor until he was so close to the edge of the bed that I could hear his breathing and smell the putrid scent that rolled off him. A gnarled, ashen hand gripped the side of the bed, and he pulled himself up. I was just inches away from him, staring into empty sockets, framed by skin that looked too aged to be his, and I couldn't think. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. Bang! An ear-splitting noise reverberated from the monitor. It was all I needed to break whatever hold David had on me. I scrambled away, intending to leap off the bed and run to my parents. Jack! Dad! Mom! I screamed, hoping one of them would hear me. I got to the edge of the bed and came to a screeching halt. My hands shot out as if I could ward away the beasts that wriggled below me. On the floor, dozens of snakes slithered along. One rose up, and I recognized it only to be the hood around its neck. Cobra.
Whoa.
We didn't have cobras where we lived. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out how they'd all gotten into the room. From behind me, David laughed. It was a bitter, angry sort of growled noise that turned my stomach. You gonna run again? He whispered, but the voice was not his own. It was deep, growly, and scratchy. Tears sprang to life in my eyes. The world blurred, becoming hazy and distorted. Run, 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 he hissed. I turned back to see him crawling along my parents' bed. He was getting closer, his teeth sharpened to a point. The flat tongue shut out again, flicking at the air. You gotta run, he taunted. Gotta run from the monsters. Gotta run from us. Run, run, run. Joey! My mother's voice rang from the monitor. Joshua, come help me get Joey down. How the hell did he get up on the shelf? She asked. Joey only had one shelf in his room. It was useless because it was too high. It hung just a foot away from the ceiling. Even Dad couldn't reach it without a stepladder. I imagined my poor little brother perched 7 feet in the air, crying for his parents. The bed shook, pulling me from my thoughts, and I glanced back. David was getting closer. He was right on top of me, moving with slow, exaggerated steps as though he were drawing this out. I inched towards the edge of the bed. The cobra bobbed back and forth, not unlike the coral snake had right before it had struck the back of my shoe so many months ago. Go ahead, Jasmine, David taunted. Jump. It won't bite. I turned back, his lips twisted up into a wicked smile. Jasmine! Jack shouted from the hallway. He balked at the doorway, his eyes wide as he gaped at the beasts on the ground and the monster beside me. His fingers found the switch and the room flooded with yellow light. David hissed from beside me, forked tongue darting from his mouth. Come and play, Jack, he taunted. Jack grabbed something large and silver from his neck and held it up. It wasn't until it gleamed against the light that I could make out its shape. It was a large cross. He must have been sleeping with it around his neck. And Jesus healed many who were ill with various diseases. Jack shouted the words with conviction, holding the cross up to point it at David. David's nose crinkled in absolute disgust. He cringed with every word. His hands went to his ears. He began to thrash upon the bed, his legs flailing, causing blankets to bunch up around him. Shut up, he screamed, but Jack pressed on and cast out many demons, and he was not permitting the demons to speak because they knew who he was. The snakes below me began to smoke and sizzle. They writhed in pain, twisting and contorting. I saw my chance and I took it. I pulled myself to my feet and darted across the bed. As my feet hit the edge of the bed, I catapulted off. At first I was certain I wasn't going to clear the snakes, but by some miracle I landed hard upon the ground with a massive thud right beside Jack. David let out a roar and leapt to his feet. His features were twisted with unimaginable hate, his hands curling into fists at his side, and he screamed. I rattled the walls and sent a chill down my spine. I'd never heard anything so terrible in all my life. I clung to my brother, who continued to shout holy words. David's body tensed. He crouched down as though to jump toward us. Jack's hand pushed me behind him, shielding me with his body as he continued to shout Bible verses at the demon. David jumped, propelling himself forward, and with a massive thump, he hit the wall. At first I thought he'd missed. I thought that perhaps the words Jack was reciting had fucked his focus up so badly that he'd actually missed. I knew how wrong I was when he scurried over the wall, crawling along it like a spider knight. My eyes widened, and Jack clutched the cross to himself, grabbing me. We ran. David took chase. Just behind us, I could hear him running on all fours along the wall. He hissed and seethed and cursed Jack. He threw out threats and promised a fate worse than death. Jack shouted the words louder. Panic filled me as I realized we'd run directly past the staircase into the end of the hall. David was directly behind us, and I was sure that all he had to do was reach out and he could pull me away from my brother. Jack darted left and pulled me into his bedroom at the end of the hall. He slammed the door and pulled me into his lap. Together we cowered in the corner, beside his bed. Outside the locked door, we could hear the pitter-patter of David's hands and feet as he scaled the walls. Something hit the door, causing it to shake. David screeched. Let me in, he roared. Let me in, let me in. I'll kill you. I'll rip you apart. I'll hang you from the fucking tree. I'll eat your fucking hearts. I didn't know it at the time, but Jack had coated his door in holy water. David continued to rage just outside the door. The sound of breaking glass and furniture being tossed around echoed through the hallway, and then it stopped. For a long while it was silent. The creak of a door opening sliced through the stillness. Bang! The door slammed. Johnny screamed. And that's the end of part 4!
Oh, God.
It's so good.
Scary. What does he want? Like, souls, I suppose?
Yeah, I guess.
But,
torment. To torment innocence.
It's just fun for him,
corrupt
probably.
them. Yeah, it's a good time. And now it's like on principle he has to win.
Right.
I feel.
Yeah. Creepy.
So I guess our next holiday is St. Patrick's Day?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can. Yes, that's a holiday.
Yeah, it's a holiday. We'll make it work. Well, hopefully you guys can hang on with that.
Yeah, except is President's Day at the end of February? Just a random U.S. holiday.
President's Day
because that's
2023.
even sooner.
No, Monday, February 20.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so yes, Monday. Feb 20. Okay. Well, that's a holiday. Fuck
Yeah,
it.
why not?
I was thinking January and I was like, wait, no, that's a
Yeah.
month from now. But
Yeah.
it is a month from now, but we're recording ahead of time.
Yes.
So
Right. Yay.
okay, well, here we go, team. Stay spooky, you little weirdos.
Yeah.
That actually means that next week's episode is
Yeah.
another scary
You
story.
just
So
gotta
we'll
wrap it up. Yeah.
tie this bad boy off.
Mhm.
And then back to some standard programming.
Yay.
You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Girls Gone Spooky. And email us your spooky stories at girlsgonespooky@gmail.com. We will talk to you next week. And until then, stay
Stay spooky.
spooky.
Bye.
Bye.